Welcome to my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? With my guests, we are discussing reproductive health issues, questions you may have about your health, and debunking some of the many myths around our health. And today, it is a real pleasure to be speaking to Mel Johnson about solo motherhood. Mel is a solo mother and has used her experience to help others on this journey. She's an experienced life coach with a coaching qualification from Coach Match and over 15 years of personal development and leadership coaching, with the last 6 years focusing solely on solo parenting. She uses the blended approach of coaching, research-based information and resources, and personal insights from her own journey to provide support, to explore options, and to help support those who are deciding to go down the same path. She has grown a like-minded community full of amazing women who are all here to help and support each other. And through the content she shares, her one-to-one coaching groups, group coaching programs, and through her membership, she supports women from around the world to feel empowered and in control of their route to parenthood. So welcome, Mel.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to be here.
Now, as always, I always start with asking my guests to tell me a little bit about themselves and what led you to decide to become a solo mother.
Yeah, so basically, I split up with a long term partner when I was 29. And I thought, okay, that leaves me enough time to meet somebody else. And, you know, I thought that we would get married and have children, but I thought, okay, well, I've still got time to meet somebody else and follow that dream. I then started dating. That didn't go well. I met lots of lovely people, but just nobody that I envisaged settling down and starting a family with. So I was living an amazing life. I lived abroad. I had an amazing friendship group. I was traveling. Everything was great. But I had almost like a low level underlying anxiety all throughout that of, but what if I miss out on the opportunity to become a parent? And that makes dating harder because then you've got that pressure when you're trying to meet somebody. So at that time, this was about 8 years ago, I didn't know a single other person in this situation. I'd never heard or seen anybody become a solo parent. There was no one in the public eye that was using donor conception to become a solo parent. I didn't even really know if it was a possibility and how to do it. So when I was 36, just turning 37, the anxiety of potentially missing out on being a parent got greater than the fear of doing it on my own. And so I called a fertility clinic and told them the situation. They said, come down, we'll have a chat, we'll explain the process to you. And after years, like that was probably about 7 years of thinking it might be an option and 3 years really properly considering it, they said you can start on your next cycle if you want. And I was a bit like, oh my gosh, so this is actually, a possibility. It's something that I could do. And so that's what I did. I went to the fertility clinic. I decided that I wanted to give myself the best chance of success as quickly as possible because I'd felt like I'd been waiting so long. And so I went straight to IVF. And then, the very long story short is that I created 3 embryos with donor sperm. The first one, sadly, was a chemical pregnancy. So there was a very faint blue line, which got, disappeared over a few days. And then after a little bit of a break, I transferred the second embryo, and that's my now 6-year-old daughter, Daisy.
Fantastic. I haven't shared this before, but I have shared that I went through fertility treatment, but I don't think I've shared that I split up with my long-term partner at 32, and I met I met the person who was the father of my children at age 35, and it's difficult decisions and discussions for sure. And I said on the first date, I said, I want children. If you don't want children, don't go there. So I have shared that before, but I haven't shared that I actually, in those intervening years, asked 2 male friends of mine, if they would father
Mm.
my child if I didn't meet anybody. And I was absolutely prepared to go down the solo motherhood route. So that was, I'm 61. that was a long time ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I was definitely thinking about it, but as you say, so few people. Recently, it's become much more popular, and I'm really pleased about that. That women are not missing the boat. But it was absolutely on the agenda for me.
Yeah.
I was going to do. I was going to do it with friends, but then I met somebody, so I didn't. So thank you for all the work that you've done in this space to really make this such a important discussion that's now on the table. Now let's discuss some of the issues that you may have had. So what were some of the biggest challenges you faced during your decision making process?
So for me, and I think so common with many, it was letting go of the idea of how I thought I would become a parent. So, you know, I grew up in a time, as many of us did, where happily ever after was portrayed as, meeting the perfect partner and having children together. All the books I read, all the films I watched, that just reinforced that. I just had a belief that that is how I would become a parent. And I didn't even really question it. I never thought, what if I don't? I just assumed that I would. So letting go of that idea of how I thought I would become a parent and embracing a different way, which is in at that time I thought won't be as good. And I didn't have any reference point to show me that it could be as good. And that's why I do what I do now, to say, pardon me, it can be as good. It can be better. It depends on who your partner is, I suppose. So letting go of that fairy tale idea of how I thought I was going to become a parent was definitely the hardest part for me. Um, I'm in a very lucky position that I had a good job, I had savings, and therefore financially I was okay, because that's another tough decision, like, or tough part for a lot of people. Luckily for me, that wasn't so much of an issue. And then it was, am I going to be able to do this? Because parenthood is the one thing that you can't try it out, you can't see how hard it is, you can't test the waters, you just have to go for it. And I think that when you're doing it in a couple, what I see is that there's almost just like this belief that we will be able to do it. Whereas when you're doing it solo, I think there's a lot more consideration on, will I be able to do it? Or will I be able to do it on my own? Um, and who will I have around me to help me do it, and what will that help look like? So just making sure that you're really sort of set up, and again, I'm in a really lucky position where I'm really supported. And when I look at it objectively, think that I've probably got it easier than lots of people in a partnership, because I've got such good support around me. um, but it was the reimagining how I thought it would be. And then also at that time, I didn't know anything about donor conception. And so I worried about the impact to my child. Is this fair for my daughter? I didn't know it would be a daughter then. Is it fair for a future child to do it in this way? What will the impact be? And of course, now I've got loads more information about that. But then that was a big concern for me because I didn't have any of the information.
And you mentioned your support. So how are your friends and family reaction to when you first told them that you were going to go down this route?
So I think they all just wanted me to be happy. They knew that I really wanted to be a parent. Some of them had been on my dating journey with me. Honestly, I think partly there was a relief. They're like, oh, yes, this will get you where you want to be, hopefully. So overwhelming support, to be honest. And I think people realized that it was the right decision, realized it was time. If I waited any longer, that I might miss out, and they knew that that wasn't something that I wanted to consider. I think there was still a bit of a fairy tale from friends and family that they definitely thought maybe it would be harder and it would be better if I met someone, and still really wanting me to meet somebody, after. Um, and I'm not saying I don't want to meet someone. I'm open to meeting someone, but I think it's I was trying to help people through that you can do things differently and it doesn't feel like there's anything missing. But overall, that like 99% of people I found are really supportive. There's the odd person who I had one friend who disagreed with the decision, and it was to do with the donor conception part, bringing a child into the world without knowing who their father is throughout their childhood. Um, so you do get the odd person who don't agree with that. But for me, my close friends and family were all really, really supportive.
Did you make use of any of the other support organisations, such as the Donor Conception Network?
I did, yes. When I went to the fertility clinic, they gave me the details of the donor conception network, and that's where I started to first of all meet some other people who had done this, and also just learn about some of um, the research that had been done on it. And I use their book, their book that you read to the child about donor conception. I think it's a really brilliant starting point of a resource to read to my daughter about her conception. It really helps just having that framework and to go through it with. So yeah, I used the donor conception network. I think at that time that was all there was. There wasn't this big Instagram community that there is now. So they connected me initially with some of the people who I now count amongst my good friends.
And you mentioned the books. I had actually did some research with the Donor Conception Network about these books, because as I was at fertility conferences, I kept hearing people say, "Well, it's very difficult for people that have had children by different ways, with maybe assisted conception or surrogacy or donor eggs or donor sperm." And they said, "Well, it's difficult to tell the children." And I always point them to the Donor Conception book. So we did some research on this, and we asked people that use them what they thought about them, and they really found them useful, using these books right from birth. When you read your baby a bedtime story, read them. They're called Our Story, and they've got books for all different types of ways a family can be made. So yeah, they're really a great resource, and the Donor Conception Network are there to help anyone who's using donor eggs or donor sperm and going to make a family that way. So that's brilliant. Can I just ask you, before we go on to donor sperm, I know there are some people in our fertility community who feel that parents don't need to tell their children. They don't need to be upfront and whether they use donor eggs and donor sperm. Now, I know for you being a solo mother, it's more obvious. And the data I'm aware is that almost every solo mother will tell their child they were born from a donor sperm. But what's your view about people that think about keeping that a secret from their child?
I think what I would sort of say is to try to ask yourself why you're doing that. Because I have interviewed for my podcast numerous donor conceived people, and I think that you can't argue with people's lived experience. You can if you want, you can debate the research, you can have your own view, but if you listen to somebody's lived experience, it's hard to dispute it. That's how they feel, and they've been through that situation. So everybody that I have spoken to who's donor conceived has said the most important thing is clear, open, confident communication from birth. And so I think that is what we must listen to. What's really interesting is what you said about the solo parent element. I have interviewed many donor conceived people who've been raised by solo parents, and they've all said their mum talked to them from the beginning and sort of instilled a level of confidence about this path to parenthood because of the way that they talked about it, and they normalized it, and they're like, this is my normal. I don't think it's unusual. This is just what I've grown up with. There was one interview that I did with somebody who wasn't told about her conception, and her parent was a solo parent. And I said, but how does that even work? Because so then what was the conversation? How was the explanation that there was no father in your life? And she said that they just didn't ever talk about it. And she had a very different experience than everyone else I've interviewed. And I think that, just reaffirms the importance of starting early and continuing the conversation in it can be a very casual way. It's just part of who our family are. We can talk about it openly, and it doesn't need to be like a sit down serious conversation. So I think even for solo parents, talking consistently about it, I think, is important. But where it's easier to not talk about it, where there is a father in their life, because it's sperm donation has been used in a heterosexual couple. If you ask any donor conceived people, it's the honesty, because what people feel most frustrated about is deception, having something so big kept from you. It makes it feel like it's shameful. It makes it feel like it's something that's a secret that shouldn't be talked about. So I think I try to make it something that's not at all shameful. It isn't shameful, and that it's just our situation. This is how it is, and all the work goes from me to my daughter, that she feels confident about it. She feels confident to discuss it with other people.
Yes, very well said. I've also heard from people that they found out during a divorce or a death of somebody. I know people that found out during the reading of a will, and or an argument between parents. And as you said, that's not the way to find out. And I think honesty in any
Mm.
family is really important. So as soon as I've been working in fertility, I've always felt that everyone should be honest in how they've made their children. But so many of my colleagues in sort of 10, 20 years ago said, oh, no, they don't need to tell. So I've been on a bit of a crusade to try and make sure people do be honest with their children for sure. Now, the controversial part,
Mm.
the sperm donor, finding the sperm donor. So can you just tell us about the different ways someone could use a donor? So you went to a clinic, but what are the other ways of doing this?
Yeah, I never thought that I would spend so much of my life talking about sperm. I'm constantly talking about ways to find sperm. So there's sort of, I would say there's three routes that certainly solo parents use, but possibly anybody. So one is going to a clinic and using a sperm bank. And so if you go to a clinic, they'll tell you which sperm banks they use, and then that person is classed as a donor. They have the rights of a donor rather than a biological father, and it's sort of facilitated for you through the clinic. There are issues with that route. One of the big issues, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, is there's no global family limit. So although in the UK there is a family limit of 10, families can use that donor. If that sperm is exported or imported from different countries, that number can really grow because there's no global limit as it stands at the moment. The other thing you can do is what you mentioned: ask somebody who's in your life whether they would be willing to donate sperm. I think if you've got somebody in your life that you've got a very close relationship, which you've known for a long time, which you trust, there's some beautiful stories of now how people are even co-parenting, and how they're just doing things differently. They're making it work from them. Maybe that person is known to the child, and there's all different ways that you can set it up with more or less contact, but it's somebody that you've asked to donate for you. With solo parenting, it can be easier in some senses that there's no one else, there's no dad, so you can make a space more easily than maybe if you're in a heterosexual couple, for the donor to play a role. um, or like I say, some people are just co-parenting, and they're just doing it differently. The third way is like more informal sperm donation, where you're trying to find somebody. So you haven't maybe got somebody in your life that you know, but that you're trying to find somebody who would be willing to donate. It's interesting because I'm part of the research group that Leah Gilman is leading for this. So have been involved in some of the research on, there are times where that route really works. And I think as a solo parent, finances often lead to using this route. It's very expensive to go down the clinic route and to buy sperm from a sperm donor. So sorry, from a sperm bank. This is more affordable. Also, for some people, they feel like it would be better to know who the donor is and for their child to be able to understand who the donor is. It's very complex and hugely, an emotional debate, because there are also many examples where this has gone quite badly wrong. Someone may have donated with one intention and then changed their mind and feel differently. Someone, you may think they're a donor, but then they actually want to play a father role. And that there's quite some examples of where that is problematic. So it's really complex, and I understand why people go down this route. And I think the work Leah Gilman's doing is really interesting, because she's trying to get under it a bit more to say, is there a way of making this better? So I used the clinic route and used a sperm bank that was part of the clinic that I used.
Yes. Let's go and delve a
A
little bit.
lot.
Yeah, let's get that. There's so much there. There's so much there we could unpack.
Mm.
So I would always recommend someone goes to a clinic either to get a donor from the sperm bank, or with their known donor to still, there is the option of
Yeah.
still going via the clinic. And the advantage with the clinic is that it's all very tight legally. So the donor will not be the legal parent of the child. They have medical tests done. It's all very neat and tidy. But there are obviously different disadvantages. You've talked about the cost, but also something I found frustrating for some couples is that, or people, is that you only now, I think it was 2005 or 2000 or earlier than that, that in the UK now you can now trace the donor. So they are now not anonymous donors anymore. They used to be anonymous donation before that. So before, was it 2005? It was 2005, I think, wasn't it? That the law changed in the UK. So before that time, and in many countries still, if you use a sperm donor from a clinic, you can't find out any identifying information about that donor. So you mentioned co-parenting. If you want to introduce your child to the donor and at least meet them, they don't have to co-parent, but you can't do that now in the UK until the child is 18. And yeah, there's so many complex issues around that. But you mentioned about co-parenting. I know cases. Two of my friends co-parented years and years ago. One of them's got grandchildren. They all get on fabulously. There are some beautiful stories about that. And the advantage of going through an introduction website would be that you could co-parent from the start. But as you said, it is a bit. There is a bit murky. There's problems with legality. The donor might not be who they say they are. Some of them, we've been told, asked to have sexual intercourse. They actually have a term for it, natural insemination. So they coerce the women and say, well, you'll get a much better result, much better chance of getting pregnant if we have intercourse, which is obviously totally unacceptable. And then on Netflix at the moment, well, there's a couple of documentaries related to this. We've got The Man with 1,000 Kids, that's been very much on social media at the moment. Difficult viewing. Why would a man want to donate his sperm to over 1,000 women to have children? And I always feel that for the children to realize you've got 1,000 half siblings, the issues around identity and family gets very, very confused. And we also have the problem that's been going on for decades in the medical field, where sometimes the doctor was the donor and he didn't tell the woman that he was using his sperm. And this has come out now. I think it's called Our Father, isn't it? About the doctor in America who has now been caught because of genetic testing. That's one of the big issues I want to bring up with genetic testing. You can often find half siblings, And in some cases, they've even found the donor. And with these doctors that were using their sperm, it didn't take much to figure out that he had donated his sperm to numerous ones of his patients. So, any thoughts about what I've just said? How careful do people have to be about meeting somebody online?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard, isn't it? Because I think I saw a clip of the guy from that had, was the donor for 1,000 children being interviewed, and the interviewer said to him, "Do you think that it's problematic for the children that they have 1,000 siblings?" And he said, "Not at all." And I just thought, based on what though? Like, go and ask any of those children. I mean, they're probably too young right now, but every donor conceived person that I've interviewed has said it becomes problematic when the numbers get too big because you can't even remember all their names. You wouldn't even know who they all are. You can't, so if you ask the people who it impacts, they say it is problematic. Um, I've seen examples where donor conceived people really, really get a lot from having these donor siblings and meeting them and, having them in their lives. But I think the general thought from them is there's a point where it's too many. Some don't and aren't interested, but I think many people will say from the child's point of view, that is problematic. And also, you may meet them and not realize you're related to them, and that does become like a real issue if you're going into these numbers. um it's difficult because they could also donate to a clinic. So you're not, just because you use a clinic doesn't mean that you've ruled out the fact that that person is also um, donating informally as well. But I think that my advice to anybody who is going to use that route, get legal advice to get an agreement in place. There is a myth, certainly in the UK, that you can legally say, "I'm not the father of this child." You can't do that. Like, there's no legal agreement that allows you to do that. But I think what is clear is if you have an agreement in place, it does two things. One, it helps facilitate how you were both expecting to go into this. And asking questions like, what do the parents' role, like, so the grandparents, have they got a role? What happens if I wanted to take the child on holiday? What happens if, like, going through all the different scenarios, so to check that you're on the same page about how that setup would work. And the second thing is, if there is a dispute, although it's not legally binding, I think it's good to say this was the intention we went into it in as a starting point. So yeah, I think if you can get that facilitated, and there are companies that do that and draw up a known donor agreement, I think that's one of the things that you can at least do, and just try to get to know the person as much as you can. But it is very difficult if someone wants to deceive you. It's hard to know if that's happening.
Yeah, and for the guys, I mean, they have to be careful. As you said, they are counted as a legal father, and they could be. The courts
Yeah,
could tell them that they have to pay for these children.
yeah,
That would be really expensive. And we do. I
yeah.
have interviewed. Yeah, I have interviewed one of the guys who did donate to a lot of women, and I really don't quite understand their motivation. But I haven't watched the series yet, so I'll have to
Mm.
see what. I think his name's Jonathan. I have to see what his motivation
Mm.
was. Obviously, very egotistical to do this. Right, that's enough of donors. We could talk about donors for an hour, but let's move on. How was it? So I've been through fertility treatment myself, and it's really, really difficult. And obviously, pregnancy is difficult. So, what was it like going through these medical procedures and pregnancy on your own?
So for me, this is something that I try to help people with, because I think that a lot of people assume that it'll be harder going through it alone than it will be with a partner. For me, I was actually really excited. I was like, finally, I'm getting to where I want to be. There's an option for me. I feel lucky that I live in this country at this time, and this is available for me, and privileged that I've got the finances to do it. And I felt like finally I had a plan and an answer, and I was moving in the direction I wanted to move. So there was an element of, as a solo parent, this was almost like quite empowering and quite exciting, as opposed to, if I had medical fertility problems and it felt like it was something that was more difficult. Now, don't get me wrong, it was an emotional process. It does take an impact on you, so I'm not underplaying it, but I think that there's sometimes we believe it will just automatically be harder on your own. I think one of the benefits of doing it on your own is that you don't have to worry what another person's feeling, or like that if they are or aren't supporting you in the way that you think they should support you, or if you want to stop and they don't, or vice versa. So for me, I had my mum there. My mum was a massive support, so I wasn't on my own. I just didn't have a romantic partner with me. She was my birth partner, which was brilliant as well. So it was okay. I signed up to do it on my own. I knew what it entailed. I had good support around me. I don't think I ever really thought, oh, I wish somebody was here going through this with me. And I think for balance, yes, there are some people who have amazing partners and it's so nice to have that support. And there's other people who have a really tough time and it's hard on the relationship. So it was okay. And I was good. I was lucky that I had the support of my mum.
Yeah, and you said at the beginning there are ups and downs with being a solo mom and being in a relationship, and I've been a single mum for the last 11 years, and I realized a while ago that, well, most couples do argue at some point, and from even my relationship before we split up, and other relationships I see, some of the arguments are about the children, so that they sort of compound that. And being a single solo mum, you don't have those arguments. So the only arguments in my house are normally about who's loading the dishwasher. So the arguments that
Yeah.
other couples would see, and especially around bringing up children, we did have differences about bringing up children when I was with my partner. So we do have a very quiet, well, I'm very loud, but not, no, sort of argumentative wise, we
Yeah.
don't argue. We have very few arguments in our house. Maybe that's something that's healthy. Maybe it's healthier to have arguments. I don't know. But there's certainly the research that people have done, such as Susan Gollenblock, some beautiful research following up different types of families, have shown no disadvantage to the children at all from different types of family construction, including solo mothers. So let's talk about what it's like now being a mother. So your daughter, she's 6 now, I think, at the moment, is she?
She's 6. Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I feel like I've got a responsibility to give a really balanced approach, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to replace one fairy tale with another. So I don't want to like say, "Oh, it's amazing, everyone should do this." And my message isn't, everyone should do this, who needs men anyway. That just isn't the message. The message is, if you're in this situation, this is an option for you. This is what it looks like. So I would say, in terms of a balanced view, being a new parent is hard. I think any parent will tell you that the sleep deprivation, not knowing what you're doing, and suddenly going from being single and free and like being able to do what you ever you want, to being totally, having to be there for a child is can be like a big contrast, a big change. So I think from the solo parenting point of view, those early days, the relentlessness of you being the only person doing all the feeds, all the nights, all the nappy changes, I don't want to make it out to be a fairy tale. It's hard, but also you're like, oh, yes, I've got this. I've got to experience this. I think my experience is, as my daughter's grown up, or growing up, she's only 6. It's gets easier and easier. So they get more independent and you start to get a little relationship with them. And what I love is that there's no third party like to think about that relationship. So you just focus on you and them. And I think so many solo parents say we've got such a good connection because we spend so much time together. It's the two of us. Um, so I have every age has been challenging for different reasons. But I don't think dissimilar than it would have been if I had a partner. Like you get different challenges, the tantrums that came at 2, um, and starting school, the different transitions. But I feel like I haven't got any comparison to say how it would have been with a partner. But I think a lot of those things I would have experienced with or without a partner, because I do feel like I've got such a good support network. I do get help with things. It's not only me. I don't feel on my own. I feel like supported by quite a few different people. So it's been amazing. It's like I say, I feel privileged that I have had the opportunity to take this path. Watching a little person grow up, being part of that, yeah, amazing. But I don't want to pretend it's a fairy tale. Like there are times that are tough, but it's totally worth it.
But as you said, women in your situation, and I was almost there as well. My advice to them was, you've got a choice, especially nowadays. You've got a choice. If you really want children, then the solo motherhood is absolutely a valid route to take. If you want to
Yeah.
wait, then you can do that. But as you said, our fertility is going down. You're around that age where things start getting really important. I was when I started trying to have children as well. I was 35. And we've got to be aware that we might miss the boat. And we all know many people that miss the boat. We're going to have a podcast on childlessness with Jodie in a few weeks. So it's decisions, and they're tough decisions, but it's great that you've been putting so much useful information out there. And your podcast is called The Stalk and I. So if anyone's wanting to go down this route, then please check out everything that you're doing and follow you, and you'll hear many different voices around that space. Can I ask a tricky question? Have you had any difficult questions from your daughter about you being a solo mother?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is tricky. And I think sometimes we make it trickier than it needs to be. So as soon as they start asking you any questions, you're like, your heart's going, thinking, oh no. And I interviewed Dr. Anne Lane for my podcast, and she really helped me with this, because what she said is, as a parent, our role isn't to shelter our children from any difficult experiences. Our role is to help them through difficult experiences. And so what I've now see is that however my daughter feels about being donor conceived, I'm there to help her through that. So at times, maybe she's not happy with it, maybe she's upset with me, and that's okay. She's going to be upset with me for numerous things, I'm sure, in the future. But my role is to help her through that. So there has been a time where she said, "I wish I had a daddy," and I think that's quite common. I know a lot of solo parents whose child has said that. And it's about understanding what's triggered that. Is there something that and often it's seeing other people interacting with their dad and feeling like they're missing out on something. And it's like, okay, how can I try to make sure that they're not missing out on whatever they think? But it's allowing the space and the confidence to be able to say, this is how I feel, and not trying to dismiss it. So there's a tendency to almost be like, but you don't need to worry about missing out because you've got me and you've got granny and granddad, and it's trying not to jump to that and say, talk to me about it. So why are you feeling like that? Let's talk it through together. And I think that children, everyone's different, aren't they? But sometimes they just want to fit in and be the same as everybody else. And so some children have said to my daughter, you must have a daddy. Everybody's got a daddy. And then she's like, Mummy, they're saying I've got to have a daddy. So, and for me, it's like saying, okay, let me help you answer that question. So if people say that, what you can say is, actually, not everybody has to have a daddy. I've got a donor. And as she grows up, she will understand it more and be able to explain it more. So there are difficult questions. Other children ask difficult questions as well. So older children sometimes are like, where's their dad? Or why aren't you married? And you're like, again, it can take you off guard. And I always say, almost like prepare an answer that you can calmly say, and this is the response I'm going to give. And if you don't know what their parents will be happy with, you can sort of say, let me get your parents to answer that for you. So there are times, but I think it's just giving it space.
Yeah. And you're doing a brilliant job answering those questions with honesty. I think it's so important. Now, I've called my podcast "Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This?" And through the many women that you've spoken to and your work as a coach, have you heard women say, "Well, I didn't realize, I didn't know that before. Why didn't anyone tell me this?" What did they ask?
So many people saying I didn't know this was an option. So it's still, even now, people saying I didn't know it was an option. So why is this not more widely spoken about? I think something that actually you and I have talked about in the past, Joyce, and you came on my podcast, that just the fertility stuff. So why did people not tell me I could check my fertility? And I know it's not a perfect check, but like that, I didn't know there was any test I could have to check my fertility. Why did people not tell me that I needed to think about getting pregnant, not just not getting pregnant? Why didn't people talk more about the impact that age has? I didn't know we were born with all of our eggs, and like all of that education that you really talk about. And I often direct people to you, because as a coach, I shouldn't really be giving my opinion. So instead, I give your opinion. So when people say to me, I'm 39, I'm thinking, let me wait another 6 months, and I'm like, listen to my episode with Joyce Harper, because you're very clear to say don't wait, and from a medical point of view, and a statistical success rate point of view. So yeah, the big thing for me is that it's an option, and understanding about our bodies, and understanding all of that stuff. Why did we not talk about it earlier? And then I think on a slightly different note, understanding that happiness can be achieved in numerous different ways. It doesn't have to look like the traditional route to family or parenthood or relationship. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing different ways that it can be just as good, it can be just as, just as intimate, just as you can have, you don't need to be lonely. There's lots of different ways to do it. And why are we not showcasing all of those different ways, or why haven't we been? I think we are now. They're probably the things that I think most people are like, I just didn't know this.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for directing them to me. Yeah, everyone's got to make their own choice, but I just want them to know the information so that then they can decide what they want to do
Yeah.
in their life. And you segued nicely. You talked about happiness, segued into my very last questions for all my guests. What makes you happy, Mel, and where is your happy place?
So interestingly, I've got a list of things that I've done that, when you're feeling stressed and you think, right, what do I need to do? And it's really simple things like sitting outside with the sun on your face, listening to the sounds of the waves, reading a book. As you can see, I'm obsessed with reading, but being in my house with my daughter in a calm environment, exactly what you were saying. There's not arguments, there's no tension, it's calm. So just being together, doing simple things, being in the outdoors, being in nature, they're all the things that make me happy. And also helping people to reframe their thoughts about solo parenthood and seeing this differently is something else that makes me hugely happy.
There's some guests, I just want to give them a big hug when we finished. And today's one of them. I just wish I was there. We were in the same room. I could give you a big hug, Mel. Now, the very last question. Interested to see what you say about this. What's your advice to your younger self?
My advice to my younger self was live life and don't spend so long worrying about what might happen or what might not happen. So I wish that I had got fertility tests and known more about what was a possibility for me to allow me to enjoy the time I was having and not have such a weight on my shoulders about what might happen in the future. So yeah, I know it's really difficult because it can take over, and the worry and the anxiety of not being able to meet someone to achieve what you're trying to achieve. But knowing that there would be other options, and whichever of those options worked out for me, I would make work, is what I wish I would have told my younger self.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I hope even if one or two women listening think, oh, this is great, I'm going to do this, then we've done our work today. So thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me.